Hey guys, Four Shot Boss is here. Before we get into this installment, I just want to apologize for no upload last week. I'm going to be finishing up the Russian army story today, so that it kind of makes up for not posting last week, because there's only 2 parts left, and then maybe later in the week I might end up posting another video as well. Alright, on to the story. I pretended to be insane to avoid being conscripted into the Russian army. After 4 weeks in the asylum, I started to understand what's going on here. First things first, last time when I posted, some of you suggested that perhaps I'm really crazy and that I've made Morona up, as well as the entire premise of me dodging the draft, that I'm really schizophrenic. It is so ridiculous. I wish I could laugh into all of your faces. Really? Is that what you think after I pour my heart out to you? Would a crazy person be doubting their own sanity? No. I can't believe how unbelievably stupid you have to be to think that I'm the crazy one. As I've said the last time, I'm the only one sane here. What more do you need to get that through those thick heads of yours? But no matter. Keep reading. I'm a reasonable man. I know that after you read this, even the greatest of critics will cede under the downpour of proof I'm about to shower you all with. Only a reasonable man would manage to uncover the whole truth. The crazy one would not be able to tell the reality apart from their delusions. Although, it would be hard to blame them for that. The things that happen here make even me question what is real and what isn't. Only my indomitable will and my genius intellect can keep me anchored to reality. The rest of the people here are like blind puppies. I don't even bother to convince them. What do they know? What use is them learning something new? Will an ape in a zoo become more useful to society if it learns about the patchwork of the universe around it? I doubt it. Sitting in a cage is all it'll ever be good for. Last week, the dreams have become unbearable. I see them more clearly, and the same scenario plays out in my head every night. An underground prison, with thick, weaving cables encapsulated in an absurd amount of insulation, leading down the corridor to the source of the humming. It wasn't just the visions that I saw in those dreams that were causing me such distress. It was also the intensity of those dreams, their heavy atmosphere. I could feel that something horrible, something inhumane was going on there. Something that can't be put into words. It was like a trip through a death camp on a day when no one was executed there. You couldn't see it with your own eyes, but the little details around the place were giving you the full scope of the dread that loomed over the place. In some dreams, I saw the prisoners being led away from the humming door. They were rambling, and their facial expressions left no room for doubt. Whatever happened to them there, they'd been damaged by it beyond repair. All that was left to do with them was to stick them into the asylum, where no one would take their rambling seriously. One such particularly intense dream was interrupted. I think it was Wednesday. I woke up to see that the sun was still down, which puzzled me for a bit. I usually woke up early in the morning, around 7 a.m. But then, I started hearing the sounds that had woke me up. The rattling of metal beds. The clanking of spoons in the cafeteria. It seemed that the ghosts that before that moment had inhabited the abandoned wing finally decided to move out there. The other patients started waking up, many of them becoming agitated by the things that were happening. Damn fools. It was their panic that reminded me that I was supposed to stay calm, that I wasn't one of them. In that moment of clarity, I realized what the true culprit of that chaos was, and it was a revelation that made my hair stand up. It was an earthquake. The impossible earthquake that wasn't supposed to happen in our town. 30 years after the last one, it finally happened, and I suspected that I knew why. It definitely had to do with that room we had unsealed last week. The room with the stairwell leading down below the ground. I knew that it was where the prison from my dreams was. Not for a fact, but I strongly suspected it. After a short while, the earthquake had subsided. The nurses came in to calm everybody down, telling us all to go to sleep, and then left. But I knew that something was wrong. Something had gone off at that night to cause the earthquakes. So I only pretended to be asleep and instead stayed awake. I kept pinching myself under my bed sheets and poking my fingers on a sharp spring that was sticking out of the bed beneath my mattress to stay awake. Almost an hour later, the wait had paid off. I heard the familiar thumping pace of Vovoda, as well as shamblings of bare feet next to her. "Keep going!" Even Vovoda's whispers were loud. "Don't you dare wake anybody up!" I heard a mumbling, rambling voice answer her, and although I didn't know for sure who it was, I had a strong suspicion. Carefully getting out of my bed, trying my best to make sure that the springs under the mattress wouldn't betray me, I carefully proceeded towards the door and carefully slid it open, just enough to peek through the slit. My guess turned out to be correct. It was Sasha. Somehow, Vovoda had found him down there. He had lost almost half of his weight and was almost a walking skeleton. It was clear that he had nothing to eat in there. And I didn't want to even start thinking about what he had drank in there. The walls of that part of the building were always so moist. He was rambling something to himself as Vovoda was practically pulling him like a mannequin. It wasn't clear what exactly he was saying, but I knew that it was nothing like his speech had been before. All of his mannerisms of a professor were gone, making way to the primitive speech patterns of an animal that lives deep within all of us. "Hey!" I heard someone call for me from the other side of the corridor. Looking there, I saw Marone grinning at me. He had been evading me all that week. Why had he decided to show himself then? Making a gesture for me to follow him, he disappeared into the darkness of the abandoned wing. I was tempted to follow him there, but I knew that Vovoda would see me. But I knew where Marone had been hiding now. It wasn't just a hunch anymore. It was all but confirmed. I needed to come up with the plan, and befitting for a genius like me. I came up with it before my head even hit the pillow. I needed a distraction, and I knew how I'd get it. On the next day, I approached a few patients from other rooms. Feigning friendship, I offered them a deal. Each of them would get a cigarette if they could create a distraction for me at night. My healthy lifestyle had paid off. After weeks of slaving for the nurses, I had almost a dozen of the cigarettes. One cigarette was all it took to convince someone to help me out. I also spent 2 cigarettes to convince Sapog to steal a flashlight for me. Without it, navigating the dark halls of the abandoned wing at night would be hard. We weren't on close terms anymore, Both of us avoided each other's company, so I decided to promise him something in return. Promising him a reward paid off. I didn't know how he'd accomplished it, but before we went to bed, he snuck me a working flashlight. One of those the nurses used. I didn't know if the patients could be trusted with a plan, but I made it as dummy-proof as I could. I told them to start screaming at either 3 a.m. sharp or if they heard someone else scream. I didn't get an ounce of sleep. I was too excited about that, and I feared that I might have overslept by accident. I was out of the cigarettes now. There wouldn't be another chance to pull it off. Someone started screaming at 1:30 a.m. Not ideal, but it worked. Whoever it was, they were doing such a good job, they must have woken up the rest of the patients as well. One by one, they started screaming and lamenting, drawing the nurses' attention to them. It seemed my plan worked, even better than expected. I could hear that almost the entire hospital worth of patients was screaming. Even those who weren't in on the ruse had become agitated. The wave of panic was spreading like fire through gasoline. Running past them was easier than I'd thought. They were too busy putting the patients to rest to notice me in the hall. I only heard some of them call for me when I had already run into the abandoned wing, but at that point, it didn't matter. I knew they wouldn't follow me in there. Not after what had happened to the other nurse. I turned on my flashlight and headed for the room with the stairwell. Luckily, the path there was pretty straightforward, so I knew where I was going. Throughout my entire trip there, I could hear the whispers coming from the rooms. Slapping of bare feet. Nothing menacing, aggressive, just a sign that something else was in there with me. A few times I saw something run from one room to the next in front of me, just out of reach of my flashlight's cone of light. It would always make me stop, make me want to reconsider what I was doing, but then I'd remember how far I've come. I was going to uncover the secret of that place, for sure. I was going to find Marone and make him answer for what he'd done. As I slipped into the room with the stairwell, I noted with pleasure that the hanging lock on the door in the grate that separated the room in 2 halves had been broken. No doubt Vovoda hadn't found the key and decided to brute force her way in. I slipped through the door and headed for the stairwell. The elevator next to it didn't work, but I didn't expect it to anyway. It was probably dangerous to use it anyway. Even before I started my descent, I could tell that the stairwell was very deep. The light of my flashlight couldn't illuminate the bottom of it. Bracing myself, I started descending. I'm not sure how long it took me to go all the way down. I can tell, though, that it was one of the most terrifying experiences in my life. The stairwell was very dark, with walls covered in black moss, absorbing all the light of my flashlight, and the echoes of my footsteps were so loud that it was hard to tell if it was me walking or someone else. I expected something to jump at me at every corner, and the length of the journey down was making me paranoid that there was no end to it. That I was stuck in a sort of limbo, a stairway between hell and heaven, and I was descending that stairway. It didn't make it easier to stay calm when I noticed the bleak red light coming from below. I imagined brimstone and fire. I strained my hearing, ready to hear the cries of tormented souls, but there was nothing like that. Only when I descended a few dozen meters more, I noticed that it wasn't the fire of hell I was seeing. It was the red lights of the emergency system. At least my destination had some electricity, I noted. Downstairs, there was a massive bunker door with a switch next to it. I instantly recognized it to be a master switch, though I had no clue where the electricity was coming from. It was nice to know the place still had after 30 years. Perhaps some backup generators withstood the 30 years test and could still work as intended. I opened the door, stepped through, and immediately found myself in a corridor going in two directions from the door. I didn't know where they led, but somehow I knew which one to take. More of my dreams were about the underground prison, which I had no doubt was somewhere there. But I could somehow navigate my way to it, almost as if the dreams had left some residual memories in my head. Memories I had no clue about until that moment. After a few minutes of wandering through those flooded with red light halls and corridors, I finally found it. The door leading straight to the prison. I didn't open it yet, but I already knew what was on the other side. I was correct. The place which had haunted my dreams was there. It felt very bizarre to be there for the first time, yet to know the room so well. A dozen cages lining the walls, thick like anaconda cables on the floor, and the door at the end of the room. The mysterious door from my dreams which always separated me from the source of that accursed humming sound. Now it was open. The inside was a control room of sorts. I could see numerous panels, the meaning of which I didn't understand, and enough chairs to accommodate at least 50 people. All of that was walled off by huge dusty panes of glass on both sides, leaving only a narrow path in the middle leading to another door there. If my estimate was correct, the prisoners which had been transferred from the prison on the other side of the town were taken through here to their destination, and the scope of the control room meant that whatever they had conducted in there was huge. No way the higher-ups of the USSR didn't know about it. I had stumbled upon one of the biggest secrets of the dead supernation. I was sure of it. I headed for the door at the end of that room. Though it was dusty, I managed to make out the words on the plaque on it. Communication Core. Who could they be communicating with at such depths? I opened the door and stepped inside. At first glance, the room was relatively small. In the middle of it stood a chair with armrests, a headrest, and the belts. No doubt the chair was meant to keep the prisoner in place, and looking above, I understood why. Above the chair, hanging from the ceiling, was a massive construction. I could see thick cables connected to it, saw the huge, titanic muscles of hydraulic pistons which were meant to move it up and down. Once shiny edges of Tesla coils circling it, details which I'd never seen before in my life. And at the center of its bottom, there was a hole. Right above the chair's headrest, whatever the machine was, it was meant to be put on someone's head. I could only imagine the horror of seeing that massive 20-ton construction come alive and come down onto you. But what was it for? Was this some sort of communication device? Only then did I notice that the room was much bigger than it seemed. That behind the chair there was a wide pit leading down. Half of the cables connecting to the machine were leading there, and I couldn't help but come closer to take a look. The pit turned out to be bottomless. I couldn't see the end of it, but at any moment, when I pointed my flashlight down, I clearly felt it. Something down there in the abyss could see me. The feeling was too much for me. Everything I'd felt before that, it was nothing next to it. It was some animalistic panic, my brain reacting to feelings it was never wired to feel. The contact with that thing down there, if only visual, had shaken me too much to handle it, and I rushed out of there, through those corridors, up the stairs, abandoning all caution, and falling right into Vovoda's arms. She was in that room. No doubt someone had alerted her that a patient had escaped to the abandoned wing, and she rushed to the hospital to retrieve me. I could see it in her eyes, that she knew where I've been. It was a mix of fury and, strangely, panic. Her secret had been revealed. "How did you manage to break the lock?" was all she asked me, pointing at its shards on the floor. With horror, I realized it hadn't been her who broke it. She must have had the key from the start. Right now, she keeps a close eye on me. For some reason, she didn't quarantine me or throw me into a solitary cell. She lets me walk around, but I understand that she must have a reasoning for it. If not for my strength of character, the strange contact below the ground would have shaken me. But I'm glad to report that I'm still perfectly fine. My mind operates with perfect clarity, and when I send you all a photo of Marone's head, you'll see that I was telling you the truth. After 5 weeks in the asylum, I finally know everything. I finally found it. I finally found the answer to what's going on. Many of you have thought that I was the crazy one, that people don't go to the asylums to dodge the draft. I know that many of you doubt that I'm telling the truth, but I've decided to give you one final update. After all, if you don't hear it, then you'll remain ignorant and think that it's all madness. Vovoda has been keeping an eye on me throughout the entire week. I'd always felt her eyes on me. She was curious why I hadn't gone mad like the rest of the people in there. I was sure that she was going to throw me into that machine. That one night I would wake up in her arms and she'd be bringing me down there to make me the same fool Sasha had become. But it seemed that destiny itself interfered. Last Wednesday, Sasha suddenly started talking loud enough to wake up the entire asylum. The nurses were anxious about him. No matter what they did, they couldn't make him shut up. After a few more hours, Vovoda appeared on the doorstep of my room. She told me that Sasha wanted to talk to me, and that he refused to talk to anyone else. I refused at first, but Vovoda never took no for an answer. Grabbing me in a bear hug, she practically pulled me to Sasha's room and threw me in. "You won't come out until he tells you everything he's seen. You hear me?" She hissed at me before closing the door behind me.
"Ah, there you are, good friend."
Sasha greeted me with a smile. He was bound by a restraining jacket, and his eyes were looking in different directions. A classic loony. Almost a caricature of one. Only, I didn't find it amusing. I was locked in with that person, and even though I had unrestrained movement, I felt that it wouldn't save me from him. "Hi, Sasha," I greeted him.
"I've met my girlfriend's father recently,"
he said eagerly, getting straight to the good news. I still remembered his girlfriend and how she was whispering into my ear, so I didn't congratulate him on crossing such a milestone.
"He's a terrific person, although I don't have to tell you that. You've met him too, haven't you?"
he suddenly asked me. I don't know how, but I understood what he was talking about. That dark, mysterious presence in the depths of the underground facility. Why did you want to talk to me, Sasha? I asked him.
Why? Because we both met him, of course.
He said like it was the most obvious thing ever.
He wanted to talk to you. So much. Too bad you haven't stepped into the machine. You were too scared of it. But don't worry.
He lowered his voice to a whisper. Once I tell you everything, you won't be afraid anymore. The story he told me seemed absolutely ridiculous. If I hadn't seen the things I'd seen with my very own eyes, I wouldn't believe it. It turned out that back in the 50s, the Soviet geologists concerned with the seismic activity, which was quite unusual for the place, had found something underneath our town. A giant creature whose cycloptic size defied all reason. A creature so massive that while it thrashed around in its sleep, it could create earthquakes. Telling about such a discovery to the world that was out of the question. During those tumultuous times, anything that could bring even the slightest edge in warfare was a closely guarded secret. And the creature of such impossible size was a curious specimen. Studying it could lead to new discoveries, new findings that the scientists had hoped could make Russian tanks stronger and planes faster. After a few decades of studying, the scientists came to a conclusion. The creature was sentient. Not in the conventional way that allowed it to use tools. No. Its intelligence was in fact so potent that it was above that. Its mind was a boundless ocean, a mega computer that could keep an entire universe in its imagination. While we were thinking where to get money for food, or how to find a fitting mating partner, it could calculate the Earth's trajectory for the next few million years in just a moment. No less. Such was its mind's power that with a mere thought it could either drive nearby people crazy or enlighten them with the secrets of the universe. That was the edge the military was looking for. A gateway to the secrets of the universe, which would then be inevitably weaponized. They've started constructing the communication facility immediately, and even rolled out a prototype of a communication device. Very soon, however, they'd found out that the contract with the creature's mind was usually driving people crazy. A chance of successful contact was 1 in 1,000, which meant two things. First, the scientists would require a lot of test subjects, and second, they'd have to dispose of them somehow after they were used up. They needed a front. A place where they could put all the crazy people coming out of their facility, preferably nearby. Which was why the asylum was constructed. Right above the facility, so that they wouldn't have to move the test subjects too far. But very quickly it turned out that the contract had another nasty side effect. The creature was leaving an imprint on the test subjects' minds, which was leading to quite an unusual psychic activity. A psychic activity that couldn't be controlled, and residual effects of which could be felt even after the test subjects' deaths. With such dangerous side effects and almost no sizable positive results, the experiment was ultimately deemed as a failure. When the Soviet Union collapsed, the new authorities didn't want to keep up the operation, and they ordered to have the facility along with the wing to be locked down and abandoned. They didn't account for one thing, however. It turned out that while the creature's contact with humans was usually brief, it had gotten used to it, and now it wanted more. So much so that it started tracking potential interesting conversationalists and bringing them to the asylum. While it was locked underground, its psychic presence reached out far.
"It has talked to me, friend,"
Sasha told me.
"Now it wants to talk to you."
Naturally, I was not about that, and I didn't want Vovoda to know that too. But I couldn't stay there any longer. I called for Vovoda, and she immediately escorted me to her cabinet. No doubt she wanted to know what I've learned. "How much did he tell you about the facility downstairs?" She asked me immediately, as soon as I closed the door of her cabinet. "Not much," I quickly lied. She gave me a suspicious look and then offered me a deal. I tell her everything I've learned from Sasha, as well as everything I've seen, and if she liked what she heard, then she'd grant me freedom. She'd sign all the necessary paperwork and forge a few signatures to let me walk away from the asylum. Since I'd already served my time there, the army wouldn't be after me. In their records, I was already marked down as crazy, so they had no further interest in me. Once crazy, always crazy. I agreed. I'd told her everything. I told her what Sasha had told me about the facility's past. I told her that I saw and heard those ghosts in the abandoned wing, that I'd seen the paperwork where the prisoners were mentioned, that I've known about their conspiracy with Marone to make me the crazy one, and that I knew that he had been living in the abandoned wing for the past few weeks. When she heard that, she smirked. It must have amused her how easily I saw through their charade. Of course, I didn't tell her about my involvement and that the creature wanted to see me. I have no doubts that if I told her that, the deal would be off. After my moment of honesty, I've gathered enough courage and asked her a couple of questions. For example, about her involvement with the project. Strangely, she opened up to me. She told me that she found the documents mentioning the facility by accident, and that she was intrigued by the creature's ability to imbue its powers onto people. She wanted them for herself, but of course she couldn't risk going crazy. So she was hoping to perfect the communication process so that one day she too could have an ounce of its power. After that, we were done. She signed the papers and I was free to go. I was free at last. "And remember," she told me before I left the building, "do not tell anyone what you've seen here, or you'll quickly end up back here." So there you have it. I'm out of the hospital now. An insane person wouldn't be let go from an asylum, would he? The only reason I post on schedule is that I know that you people are used to it. So this is my last update. Of course, I've decided to go against my word to Vovoda and called the police the moment I had a chance. After all, she will keep torturing people down there if she isn't stopped. But they didn't take me very seriously and hung up. So I guess she'll continue her experiments, hoping to one day perfect the process so that she can do it on herself. Marone still follows me around. Apparently, Vovoda has to let him go too. I don't want to talk to him, so I hope that if I ignore him, he'll eventually go away. Although I do admit that he sometimes creeps me out. Right now, he's behind my window, and he keeps peeking inside my apartment. He thinks that I can't spot him, but I can. I've always been very attentive. I don't know why he'd go to such lengths to keep stalking me. I live on the 9th floor, so if he loses his balance, he might fall to his death. But whatever. The guy has always missed a few screws in his head. Hey guys, 4-Shot Pauses here. I just want to thank you guys for checking out this video. I want to thank TheScandalist for letting me narrate this story. It was quite a good story in my opinion, and I hope you guys enjoyed it as well. I thought it was actually quite interesting. So, be careful out there guys. Most importantly, stay creepin'.